Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are taking on a stack of source material that is, it's intensely psychological, profoundly observational, and utterly unforgettable.
It really is.
Our mission is to navigate the interior world of a young narrator and to look at how sensory memory, rigid social codes, and the often painful architecture of human desire all come together to form a very personal reality.
And it's really a deep dive into tension, isn't it? The tension between this intense inner life, the nervous impulses, the sprawling subjective reality of memory, and then the crushing weight of external pressures.
Things like family rituals, the strict rules of etiquette.
And the inherited hierarchies of society, exactly. We pull out some real nuggets of insight here that show us how, the simple act of smelling varnish or sipping a cup of tea can lock down an entire emotional universe.
It's amazing.
I think it's a surprising shortcut to understanding how we perceive class and art and love itself.
Absolutely. So, for you, the listener, our goal today is not just to summarize these observations, but to really try and grasp the mechanisms at play. We want to understand the psychological laws that govern this world, laws that you'll find remain surprisingly relevant to our own lives.
With the deep dive into self-discovery and, social physics, you could say.
I like that, social physics. Okay, let's unpack this and jump right into the deepest well of memory. Childhood anguish and the tyranny of ritual.
Right, so the foundational memory we encounter is centered around this intense nightly struggle. It's the ritual of saying goodnight to the mother.
And the incredible emotional weight the young narrator places on getting her kiss.
It's everything to him.
And it's not just a kiss, is it? The source elevates it immediately. It's described as a viaticum. And that's such a potent, historically specific term.
It is. It traditionally refers to the Eucharist given to someone in danger of death or, provisions for a really perilous journey.
Exactly. So the simple act of going to bed, of separating from his mother, is transformed into a metaphorical death or a long, dangerous voyage.
Precisely. It turns the home, which should be this place of safety, into a place of acute emotional peril. The refusal of this kiss means he has to set forth without viaticum.
Without that necessary spiritual fuel.
Think of the psychological burden that puts on a child. He's climbing each step of the staircase against my heart, literally fighting his deepest, most nervous desire to just stay in the warmth of his mother's presence.
And that opposition, that journey, leads us to this iconic sensory memory tied to the staircase, the hateful staircase.
Yes.
And what makes the staircase so hateful, we learn, is that it gave out a specific, really potent smell of varnish.
And this is where the source gives us one of its most critical psychological insights.
Yeah.
That odor, the smell of the varnish, had done something very specific. It had absorbed, made definite, and fixed the special quality of sorrow he felt every single evening.
So the abstract anguish was what chemically bonded to the physical sensation.
You can almost say that, it matters because of how the intellect reacts to it. The source explains that the anguish becomes more cruel to my sensibility, precisely because the sorrow takes on this olfactory guise.
When an emotion gets tied to a powerful, basic physical sensation,
the intellect becomes powerless to resist it.
Let's slow down on that because that is a profound observation about human memory. The intellect can argue against an idea. You can tell yourself, I shouldn't be this upset, or I know this fear is irrational, but you can't argue against a smell.
You can't. An odor is immediate. It's involuntary. It's primal.
So when you smell that specific varnish, you are instantly back in the emotion. And no amount of rational thought can untangle the two.
The emotional state is cemented. It's fixed in physical sensation. The smell is like a key that just instantly unlocks the cage of sorrow and it bypasses all your intellectual defenses.
The source even gives us this brilliant contrast to illustrate this unique power of sensation. It uses the experience of waking up from a maddening toothache.
Right. When the narrator's asleep, the overwhelming physical pain of the toothache isn't experienced as pain. It's experienced as repeating a line from Molière or trying to rescue a little girl from the water.
The pain in the dream state disguises itself as heroism or rhythm.
And the relief, when he wakes up, is that moment the intelligence can finally disentangle the idea of toothache from any artificial semblance of heroism or rhythmic cadence. Naming the pain, identifying it as just a toothache, is the intellect's victory over its artificial mask.
So to clarify that for you, the listener, in the toothache example, the intellect gets clarity and relief by separating the abstract idea of pain from its mask.
But the narrator's anguish on the staircase is the exact opposite. His pain is compressed and fixed by the smell of the varnish. He gets no relief because the mask and the emotion are one.
Escape is impossible until the environment and so the odor changes. The emotional truth is literally varnished shirt.
And this intensity of feeling and the family's attempt to manage it really sets the tone for their entire system of education.
This is such a crucial distinction. Faults were not classified by ordinary standards, like, say, lying or just simple disobedience, but by whether or not you succumb to a nervous impulse.
The whole system judged internal discipline above all else.
And that made the narrator's transgressions, staying up to see his mother again, breaking that separation rule, far graver than any stranger would ever imagine.
It wasn't just being naughty. It was a failure of the nervous system. It was yielding to compulsion, which was seen as the greatest internal failing. The threat of being packed off to school next morning was a serious consequence for a failure of internal strength.
I mean, that is a deep takeaway for anyone interested in psychology and how we develop. Our most deeply internalized sense of guilt often doesn't come from external rules, but from the unspoken, almost theological judgment placed on our own nervous impulses.
The gravest fault in this family is the failure to master your internal self. And that lesson dictates the narrator's sense of inadequacy for decades. It forces him to internalize this idea that vulnerability is a kind of transgression.
And we see how this battle between internal impulses and external rules immediately plays out when he steps outside the home and starts trying to navigate the world of social hierarchy,
Absolutely. So let's leave the intense psychological pressure of the bedroom and step into the drawing room.
where the tension between inner merit and external status continues, but now it's viewed through this comedic, satirical lens. The sources immediately highlight this ongoing tension between inherited status and actual virtue, and it's personified by the grandfather.
The grandfather is the moral anchor here, right? He's a man entirely grounded in meritocracy. His reaction to a quote from Saint Simon, which we can guess celebrated aristocratic lineage, is just one of absolute outrage. He finds the entire obsession with titles abominable.
His position is crystal clear, and it's wonderfully simple. What difference can it make whether he is a duke or a groom so long as he is intelligent and good? He insists he'd shake hands with all honest men, no matter their social standing.
So that sets the initial philosophical ideal: virtue and intelligence over titles.
But the narrative immediately contrasts this moral ideal with the complex social reality embodied perfectly by the character of Legrandin.
Oh, Legrandin. He's an individual who pretends to share the grandfather's disdain for status, but whose every single action is dedicated to maintaining and signaling his own elite connections.
He is the master of diplomatic evasion. I mean, when he's asked directly if he knows the noble Guermantes family, his reply is an artwork in signaling. He says with this stressed emphasis, "No, I do not know them."
And the key is the way he delivers it. It's not a simple fact. It's a declaration of principle. He speaks with the vehemence of a man using a highly improbable statement to demonstrate some chosen moral or even mystical vow.
He's basically saying, of course I could know their Guermantes, but I have chosen on principle not to sully myself with those connections. He's signaling his own nobility through refusal.
Exactly. And when he's pressed further about knowing people at the coastal resort of Baalbek, his evasion just ramps up into pure, flowery philosophy.
There is elsewhere, I know everyone and I know no one.
He completely avoids addressing the social connections by personifying places. He describes castles encountering one on a cliff's edge, halting to contemplate its sorrows, and he treats houses as rare and wonderful people.
He replaces a simple yes or no with this extended poetic metaphor. It's the highest form of conversational smokescreen.
And he wraps up this whole performance with a warning to the young narrator, delivered with a physicianly finger raised in warning: no Baalbek before you are 50.
It's just absurd.
The absurdity is marvelous. He justifies his social avoidance by pretending the coastal waters are physically contraindicated for an unformed temperament, because their climate breeds amorous secrets and feudal regrets.
So he cloaks his desire to hide his own connections in this pompous medical analogy, implying the young man is too delicate for the very same coastal waters where he himself is likely socializing.
It reveals this pattern, right? Social climbing is rarely direct. It's often achieved through negation and these carefully constructed self-deceptions, using high-flown language to mask simple class anxiety.
Now let's pivot from the self-conscious snobbery of Legrandin to the clear-eyed, pragmatic class analysis of Françoise, the family maid.
Oh, she is a fascinating, cynical barometer of social status, especially when it comes to the economics of giving.
She judges so sharply based on whether the recipient is of the same class as her employers. For Francoise, presents given to the wealthy people like Swann or Le Grandin are just seen as ornamental customs.
She views it with this admiring but distant smile. It's part of a strange, glittering world where the rich hunted and shot, gave balls, and paid visits. It's just what they do.
So for her, gifts to the wealthy are part of a necessary decorative tax on their privileged status. It's just part of the economy of the rich.
But she has this absolute venomous contempt for charity given to the poor, or people like myself, as she says. She specifically despises the beneficiary Eulalie, who she just labels a flatterer.
Someone who only visits to extract resources.
Right. Francoise's belief is that Eulalie's visits brought in this vast secret capital. She doesn't see charity as altruism, but as a system of patronage that can be exploited for money. Her hatred is rooted in the fear of a rival who has managed to game the system that controls her own life.
And the depth of her rage is almost theological, isn't it? When Eulalie leaves, Francoise delivers these Sibylline oracles of doom like a character from Ecclesiastes, warning that our God is a jealous God, and one fine day he will be avenged upon them.
She's internalized class struggle as divine judgment, which leads us to the formal concept of social utility, seen in Madame Swann's reason for inviting the socially undistinguished Madame Cotard.
The family is astonished, but Mama has the strategy completely mapped out.
Mama understands the psychology of social climbing perfectly. The pleasure a woman gets from entering a new social class would be entirely incomplete if she couldn't keep her old friends informed of the relatively more brilliant new ones.
Therefore, Madame Cotard is essential. She belongs to the category Mama calls the Tell Sparta people.
Why tell Sparta? What's the mechanism there?
The term refers to the ancient command to report a victory. But in this context, the Tell Sparta person is an eyewitness, strategically allowed to penetrate the delicious world of the social elite.
And they're described like a buzzing, browsing insect, a small, necessary annoyance.
The genius of the move is that their only function is to then spread abroad, wherever they go, a latent germ of envy and of wonder. They are the essential vector. The social climber doesn't have to brag. They just need a witness who will then do the bragging for them to their old, less successful circle.
It's not enough to be successful. Success has to be witnessed by those who can appreciate the distance you've traveled. This principle, that social power requires being spread by the very people you claim to be rising above, is a deeply cynical but, I think, very accurate observation of high society.
And this conversation on social life and utility provides a perfect bridge to aesthetics, because so many of these characters, especially the grandmother, are waging this personal war against utility and vulgarity in art.
The grandmother's aesthetic philosophy is extraordinarily precise. And frankly, it's pretty radical. She actively tries to negate the practical function of objects. When she's choosing gifts, even functional things like armchairs or table silver, she chooses antiques.
And the reason she seeks out antiques is crucial. It's because their long desuetude had effaced from them any semblance of utility. They were no longer just chairs or forks.
They were historical documents. They were meant to instruct the narrator in the lives of the men of other days. They become tools for intellectual and historical thought, not for comfort or consumption.
Her war against vulgarity was most visible in her fight against photography. She thought the direct, mechanical reproduction of nature was inherently commonplace. It lacked the interpretive layer that separates art from just a record.
To counteract this, she tried a subterfuge, attempting to introduce several thicknesses of art. She didn't want a straightforward photograph of, say, Chartres Cathedral.
Instead, she asked Swann whether a great painter had made a picture of it. She preferred photographs of Chartres Cathedral after Corot or Vesuvius after Turner.
So the direct photo of nature was rejected in favor of the reproduction of an artist's interpretation of that nature.
That is such a fascinating inversion of value. Why is the interpretation, even when it's reproduced, considered superior to the reality?
Because the artist has removed the commercial banality, the literal utilitarian element. The artist transforms the subject from a common sight into a unique personal vision.
It's the essence of transposition, the quality we see mirrored in the narrator's own changing perception of architecture. He notes that the steeple of the church in Cambrai is often, perhaps even more affecting when it appeared thus without the church, just standing up now here, now there among the houses.
Right, it's the unexpected, jumbled, fleeting view that gives it emotional and aesthetic power.
The spire, when it's isolated, becomes something else entirely. We get this absolutely breathtaking description of a spire in a quaint Norman town seen between two 18th century houses. It soars into the sky, but the material is described as so different, so precious, so beringed, so rosy, so polished.
I love that description. It elevates the man-made structure to the status of a natural artifact. It's seen as no more a part of the adjacent houses than would be a part of two pretty pebbles lying side by side, the purple, crinkled spire of some seashell.
The architecture, through his perspective, ceases to be stone and mortar and becomes this organic, jewel-like fragment of nature just placed there accidentally among ordinary buildings.
Even in Paris, a structure like the Dome of St. Augustine is seen as a violet bell rising across layers of jumbled roofs in an ugly part of the town. The perspective creates the beauty, regardless of the ugliness around it.
And this theme of transposition and the suppression of boundaries is central to the work of the painter Elster. The narrator suggests Elster's genius is in capturing those rare moments in which we see nature as she is with poetic vision, seeing beyond the conventional separation of things.
This is clearest in his seascapes. His common metaphor involves comparing land with sea, explicitly suppressing every line of demarcation between them. He forces you to really question where the water ends and the shore begins, confusing the boundaries of reflection and reality.
And before experiencing Elster, the narrator had this purist aesthetic. When he was looking at the ocean, he deliberately expelled the vulgar elements, the bathers, the yachts, so he could contemplate the pure, immemorial flood of ocean.
But after Elster, that completely changes. Having seen the world transposed and reinterpreted by the artist, the narrator now actively wants to see those very things he once got rid of.
The yachts with their two dazzling sails and the blue shadows of the cliff.
He is trying to recapture the artistic vision in reality itself, reversing the whole process. The art has trained him to see reality differently.
That shows the profound influence of a great artist, doesn't it? They don't just change how you view their work, they change how you view the world outside the gallery.
Exactly. And finally, on aesthetics, we have to address how great art challenges the concept of personal identity. We often project an idealized image onto people we admire.
But a great artist in a portrait will often emphasize traits we might see as flaws, a livid complexion, because those drawbacks give the picture its character.
So the great artist, by focusing on these flaws, strips away the illusion of the ordinary person. The proud subject, like Odette, is transposed from her assumed, unique, her unalterable form, and suddenly she just appears as nothing more than just an ordinary woman.
And the observer's reaction is often anger. Why? It isn't the least bit like her.
But the protest isn't about physical inaccuracy. It's because the painter has successfully destroyed the idealized identity the observer projected onto the subject, forcing them to confront the ordinary reality underneath the social mask.
And this shift from idealized identity to ordinary reality brings us right to the complex psychology of love and desire, embodied perfectly by Swann's obsession with Odette.
Swann used his sophisticated appreciation for art as the ultimate justification for his relationship with her.
He was desperate to see something noble and timeless in her. He saw traces of the old fresco in Odette's face and limbs and believed he was ceaselessly trying to recapture those images.
He felt immensely fortunate, the sources tell us, because his simple pleasure in contemplating her found a justification in his own system of aesthetic.
By convincing himself that she was a creature the great Sandro Botticelli would have adored, he rationalized his devotion. He turned a difficult, socially tricky affair into a high aesthetic pursuit.
It was a self-deception that made his passion palatable to his own intellectual standards, a way to live with it.
And this need for symbolic transformation extended to the famous Cattleya incident, which became this unique private code word for their intimacy.
The Cattleya orchid itself, Odette's favorite flower, is described with such high irony. It's noted for being made apparently out of scraps of silk or satin and deemed a smart flower.
And it's described as more worthy than many real women of admission to her drawing room. It's an artificial flower that has the right social credentials.
Crucially, to do a Cattleya is introduced as an expression linked to sudden, inexplicable intimacy. The act itself is veiled by this floral metaphor, creating a private language that both sanctifies and conceals the physical reality of their passion.
It's an intellectualized evasion, another form of varnishing reality.
And Swann's love forces him into this complex, self-defeating calculus of suffering. He has these profound paradoxical thoughts on happiness and unhappiness.
Initially, he counts his blessings, his fortune, his social position, his friendship with Monsieur de Charlus, all the things that prevent a final devastating break with Odette.
And this leads him to the conclusion. People don't know when they are happy. They're never so unhappy as they think they are. He's trying to minimize his current pain by invoking the possibility of an even greater loss.
But then, as he reflects on just how long this affair has been going on, sacrificing his time, his work, his social pleasures for meetings that often don't even bring him any real happiness.
He reverses the thought entirely. The pendulum swings.
People did not know when they were unhappy, that they were never so happy as they supposed. The avoidance of the final agonizing break, which he first saw as a blessing, was actually a disservice to his career and his future self.
His suffering was actually greater than he acknowledged because he refused to let the source of the suffering go.
And this leads to the truly dark aspect of his desire, the hope for her death. In his agony, he sometimes hopes Odette would die painlessly in some accident.
It's the narcissistic desperation of the lover who knows the relationship is destroying him, but he just lacks the will to end it himself.
He even marvels at the sheer strength and suppleness of the human body that continually outwits the perils his secret desire had strewn in her path. He's waiting for fate to do the dirty work of separation for him.
And this dark impulse finds this strange intellectual justification when he sympathizes with Muhammad II. Swann admired the Bellini portrait of the Sultan, who famously stabbed his beloved wife to recover his sovereign's favor.
That is a devastating insight into the psychology of jealousy and ownership. It's the ultimate expression of the lover prioritizing his reputation, his status, his former life over the object of his affection.
Destroying the object is seen as the only way to reclaim the self.
And we see the crucial role imagination plays in determining value when we compare the perspectives of the narrator and Saint-Loup mistress.
The narrator encountered her first and found her merely a woman desirous of earning 20 francs. Crude, entirely lacking in value or romance.
His value assessment was based on her literal price.
But Saint-Loup arrived by the entirely opposite route, through this long, agonizing pathway of endless hopes and doubts, suspicions, dreams. For him, that same thin and narrow face was worth more than 1 million, more than one's family.
This is the central, undeniable truth about desire extracted from these sources. The value of an object is derived entirely from the difficulty and imagination you invest in the pathway to get it.
Reality is secondary. The process is everything.
Saint-Loup's suffering over their quarrel is equally telling. When the definitive break is certain, his immediate first-wave anxiety actually subsides. It's replaced by a kind of relief.
But that's instantly replaced by a secondary grief.
And this secondary grief is purely anticipatory jealousy. It's the fear that she might want to make up, which would just restart the agony of uncertainty, or worse.
That others perhaps were taking advantage of the time which he was letting slip. His pain shifts from fear of losing her to fear of another possessing her.
And this jealousy culminates in this truly terrifying, vivid dream sequence. Exhausted by his own emotional turmoil, he falls asleep and dreams he's hidden in a country house.
And he hears distinctly these spasmodic, regular cries which his mistress was in the habit of uttering at the moment of gratification. This imagined betrayal is so auditory, so vivid and physical, that it wrenches him awake.
The genius of that moment is that the betrayal isn't a concept or an image, it's an auditory memory. It forces him to experience the intimate sound of his own betrayal, entirely generated by his own tortured imagination.
The internal world creates a reality that's more agonizing than any external fact could ever be.
And the narrator's own struggle to become an author and poet is the central intellectual thread running through all of this. He feels he has to discover the truth that's hidden beneath his sensory impressions, the mystery under the form, the perfume, the color.
He recognizes this task as a strenuous effort, requiring constant vigilance.
And his struggle is that he can't maintain that effort. He constantly seeks excuses to relax. He describes this failure using this beautiful, evocative analogy.
He carries the mystery home, the powerful impression, protected by its visible and tangible covering, like a fish he's caught, buried in a basket of grass to keep it cool and fresh until he can examine it.
But once he's home, once the immediacy of the impression is gone, he just forgets the fish entirely. The initial spark of insight dies in the comfort of his routine.
And the result is that his mind becomes littered, just like his room is cluttered with gathered flowers and odds and ends and stones that reflect light. The sheer quantity of confused, unrelated images and impressions just smothers the single fragile reality he was meant to decipher.
The internal reality he sought must have perished long ago under the weight of all these accumulated trivialities.
And yet, there is one rare, vital moment of success, the Martinville steeple revelation.
Right. While he's riding on Dr. Persipad's box, he catches sight of the twin steeples. This view provokes a special pleasure which bore no resemblance to any other, and crucially, it compels him to stop and examine the impression a little more thoroughly.
And this moment is a success because he overcomes that inertia that usually leads to forgetting. He focuses, he dissects, and the moment yields a truth, a specific literary apprehension that stands out against his general failure to synthesize his experiences.
It proves that the path to a vocation is found through focused effort, not passive accumulation.
And we quickly see that his greatest obstacle to this focused effort is his social life. After he gets access to the world of the swans, his ability to work just disappears.
He's constantly running to their house instead of sitting at his desk. And even when he's physically alone, his solitude is only apparent.
That's because he replaces genuine reflection with mental performance. He sits alone, but he's actively engaged in a mental society. He continues to fashion remarks such as might have pleased or amused the swans.
He puts to himself imagined questions, just so his brilliant epigrams can serve as happy answers.
He isn't meditating or writing. He's having an imaginary cocktail party, and this pastime is a conversation, not a meditation. It's a passive pleasure of sluggish digestion. Social validation, even imagined, just drains the intellectual energy you need for creation.
This drive for social proximity even dictated a massive life choice. He decided against a diplomatic career abroad.
And he realized later that he made that irrevocable decision impelled by a state of mind which is destined not to last, his desperate current desire to be near Joubert.
The profound implication is that we often make life-altering, permanent decisions based on intense, fleeting emotional states that we mistake for eternal truths.
He realizes that the strange substance which was housed in Joubert might easily migrate to another person, and that the same emotion, the delicious poison, can no longer be taken with the same impunity when the heart's resistance has diminished with age.
His capacity for suffering isn't static. What was intoxicating in his youth could be deadly in his maturity.
Finally, let's look at the literary taste of the admired writer, Bergot. The younger generation, represented by Bloch, condemns classical writers like Lucette and Racine.
They claim they once composed a line that was only rhythmical and meant absolutely nothing. So they're prioritizing meaning over melody.
And yet, Bergot's influence endures, even among those younger writers who reject him. Unconsciously, they show this affinity to Bergot by adopting his syntax, his accent, and a certain quiescent, lingering tone.
This shows a key distinction. Originality of mind, which creates a unique style, is separate from originality in conversation, where Bergot himself was prone to imitation. His literary essence was deeper than his social surface.
And his criteria for praise are fascinating. Bergot favors the concrete image over abstraction. When he's praising a book, he quotes scenes that give the reader a picture that had no rational significance.
Like a little girl in an orange shawl or a regiment marching, he seeks these vivid, non-conceptual, purely visual moments that just stick in your mind.
And the most surprising detail is his favorite adjective for style: mild. His Chateaubriand is milder in Atala than in René. He uses the word like a doctor, prescribing milk, implying he values a style that is harmonious, serene, and easily assimilated, rather than one that is violent or aggressively intellectual.
Stepping back into the social landscape, we find a world filled with contradictions, perfectly embodied by M. de Charlus, an aristocratic figure who holds this surprising hostility toward his own class.
He has a deep, generalized prejudice against the aristocracy. He sometimes believes it's easier to credit a man of the people with superior qualities, and his contempt for his own milieu is brutally expressed when he dismisses the Princess de Luxembourg simply as an old trout. Like all that lot.
So he's a fascinating paradox, deeply aristocratic in lineage, yet almost revolutionary in his dismissal of the current social makeup of the aristocracy.
But this democratic disdain just evaporates instantly when history and culture are at stake. He actively engages in discussions of architectural preservation, opposing the destruction of the Hameau, fiercely contrasting a whim of Madame Israel, which represents modern commercial encroachment, with the precious memory of the Queen, which represents historical, cultural value.
So he's simultaneously disdainful of the aristocracy's people and fiercely protective of its historical artifacts. His loyalty is to the past, not the present company.
The ultimate execution of social identity, however, is observed in the entrance of the Duke and Duchesse de Guermantes into a box at the opera. This is not a mere arrival. It is a meticulously choreographed performance.
The Duchess's entrance is a masterful blend of contradictions. It demonstrates her social dexterity. She blends the grandeur of the goddess with a strange meekness.
And she turns her head to her party, but then gives a familiar good evening of an old and intimate friend to the demigods of the Jockey Club.
She achieves the impossible. She manages to look like a divine being, utterly unattainable, while simultaneously confirming her status through intimate familiarity with the most powerful men in the room. Her status is both mythological and utterly grounded in specific high-level connections.
And the Duc de Guermantes follows, described almost as a scattering of light, the flash of his monocle, the gleam of his teeth, and the whiteness of his shirt front scattering the darkness. They don't simply arrive. They perform a dramatic social event that instantly organizes and illuminates the entire hall around them.
Now, in stark contrast to that social opacity, we get this fascinating insight into Saint-Loux's explanation of military logic.
He argues that interpreting military maneuvers is like reading a complex work of art, which sharply contrasts with the deliberate vagueness of diplomats like Sujet Norpois.
Saint-Loup claims that to appreciate a strategy, you should ignore headquarters reports, because those might be intended to deceive the enemy. Instead, you have to consult the manual of field operations, the traditions, the doctrines.
He suggests that what appears as a confused jumble to the ordinary reader becomes, for the educated observer, a chain of reasoning as straightforward as a picture is for the picture lover. The external observer sees chaos. The initiated sees logic and intentional design.
This military analysis reinforces the importance of the apparently insignificant detail, a theme that echoes throughout all the sources.
Exactly. Saint-Loup notes that an apparently insignificant incident, like support being withheld, can explain why an enemy only carried out part of a strategic plan. The small detail unlocks the meaning of the entire large-scale picture.
It's a compelling analogy for life itself. Often the grand strategy or the broad narrative is a lie, and the truth is only revealed in the minute, often overlooked specifics.
And finally, we return one last time to Françoise, whose rural philosophy remains unshakable by all this social performance.
She is just flooded with hilarity upon hearing the names Cambrai, Méséglise, Tansonville. She feels they are old companions who contain a great part of herself.
Her nostalgia is profound, and it's rooted in the earth. She expresses this firm desire to retire to her brother's house at Cambrai, arguing rich people have queer ideas to stay in the city, where you can hear the frogs singing 5 miles off and more.
Her logic implies that true, sensory, visceral life is found away from the corrupting, abstract influence of the city. And her conclusion on social dynamics is utterly determinist and clear.
So long as the world goes round, look, there'll be masters to keep us on the trot and servants to do their bidding. It's an unshakable class philosophy. She accepts the perpetual motion of hierarchy as a law of nature, unlike the intellectual turmoil of the narrator or the sophisticated maneuvering of Le Grandin.
We circle back now to the core philosophical engine of the sources, the nature of time and memory. The narrator analyzes the actual stratification of his recollections, discovering that memories are not a uniform substance, but are layered, much like geological strata.
He notes that, although they're condensed into a single psychological substance, you can still discern 3 distinct strata. First, the oldest and most instinctive memories, those closest to the nervous system.
Then, second, those restored recently by a specific taste or perfume, like the tea or the varnish.
And third, those acquired at secondhand, such as Swann's love story, which was told to him later.
I love the geological metaphor used here. He says these layers don't display geological faults or fissures, which would suggest breakage, but rather they reveal veins, those streaks of color that point to differences of origin, age, and formation, just like geological streaks in marble.
It implies that memory is a composite rock, a blend of different experiences and life stages that have been pressurized together, but whose original composition is still chemically identifiable. It's a record of the past and the present.
But not all memories are treated equally by the mind. The cruel memories, especially a cutting word, that inimical letter from Gilbert, remain unusually vivid because they were devoured during fearful anguish. They were absorbed when the emotional system was on high alert.
They're spared the mind's tendency to romanticize. Unlike the romantic images we might contemplate in melancholy calm, these painful fragments came from without, carrying the individual back to reality from the baseless hopes engendered daily.
They are rare witnesses to a monstrous past, untouched by the mind's natural impulse to refashion history into a miraculous age of gold.
Pain, paradoxically, is the truest historian.
And this brings us to the crucial psychological mechanism of desire and its decay upon fulfillment. The narrator's experience with Gilbert, once he gains access to her world, demonstrates this unwanted happiness. The predictable pleasure of knowing her starts to shrink.
The certainty of having the pleasure diminishes it instantly. He finds himself regretting the probability of having to abandon his solitary intellectual pursuits for her.
The sources formalize this with a really powerful analogy, stating that desire thrives on difficulty and uncertainty, and it's maintained by laws as precise as those of hydrostatics.
Hydrostatics, it's the physics of fluids at rest and the pressure they exert. So if you imagine desire as a pressurized container, the pressure is maintained by the external force of difficulty, uncertainty, and distance.
The moment the container is opened, the moment certainty is achieved, the pressure drops, and the pleasure instantly contracts.
The value is in the chasing, not the catching.
And this psychological need for difficulty culminates in the narrator's dark, paradoxical love for the unattainable Duchesse de Guermantes. Since she is remote and privileged, his greatest happiness would be for God to overwhelm her with every imaginable calamity.
He wishes for her to come to him ruined, despised, stripped of all the privileges that divide them. It is the desire for her total dependency, an ultimate reversal of power, driven entirely by his own narcissistic need to possess her without the inconvenience of his own inferiority.
And what does he do with this intense, self-centered fantasy? Instead of setting himself to the strenuous work of writing,
He spends the time inventing a whole novel crammed with adventure where the Duchess falls upon misfortune. It's the ultimate act of creative procrastination. He uses his powerful imagination not to decipher the reality of the steeples or the smell of varnish, but to fulfill a desperate, self-centered fantasy of possession through the ruin of another person.
the difficulty of writing is replaced by the ease of dreaming.
So we have completed this incredibly detailed deep dive through the source material. We've traced the narrator's emotional arc from the anguish sealed by the smell of varnish on that staircase.
Through the intricate social negotiations enforced by Le Grand Dane, the cynicism of Françoise, and the glittering performance of the Guermantes.
We saw how love, for Swann, needed that aesthetic justification linking Odette to a Renaissance fresco.
And how the inherent value of desire is always determined not by the object itself, but by the difficulty and imagination invested in the chase. That was confirmed by the vastly different perceptions of Saint Loup and the narrator regarding the same woman.
The central, enduring insight is this dynamic tension between the inner life and external reality. The true pursuit is often not the object of desire, but the maintenance of the desire itself. The illusion of impossibility, which, like hydraulic pressure, shrinks the moment certainty is achieved.
So what does this all mean for you? What is the core application we can take away from these intense psychological observations?
Well, the text offers one final striking piece of advice regarding how we handle emotional distress, particularly the trauma of unrequited love or jealousy. When we're disturbed by noise, we don't try to change the external world and pray for silence. We stop our ears.
Right.
Similarly, the sources suggest that in love, the most effective strategy is not to capture the other person with whom we are in love, but to focus on and capture our capacity for suffering at that person's hands.
Wow. That is a profound reframing. It means that the ultimate freedom from desire and pain lies not in changing the source of the external world, the person who causes the pain, but in mastering and dismantling one's own internal mechanism for pain.
You have to understand and control your own capacity for suffering.
That is the ultimate deep dive for you to mull over. The external world is a distraction. The real architecture of desire is built entirely within.